Hello, it's Mrs. McCullough here again. Today's mini lesson is going to add on to the previous work that we were doing about retelling. I've even added something on to our anchor chart here today. It says readers retell and summarize. Okay, so what does that mean, summarize? Well, summarize means that you're going to give us a summary. And a summary is just the most important parts. And that was already part of our anchor chart. It says right here, the most important information. And we were collecting the most important information when it was fiction. We were collecting setting and character and problem and how it was getting worse. And we were talking about how maybe there would be a guide who could help the character fix the problem. And then there's the solution. So we were talking about those are the important elements, the story elements, and we were putting them in order. And that's a great place to start. And you'll collect a lot of details in that way. But a summary means we're going to make it even shorter than that. Just the highlights, just the most important parts. And there's a trick to this. You see, in order for readers to be able to determine, well, what is even the most important whittled down from the story elements? There are 5 words. 5 words, that's it. 5 words to help you frame up those important details, the important information, so that you can turn this into a 2 or 3 sentence summary. Okay? You want to know what the 5 words are? I'll share it with you. Here they are. Somebody wanted, but so then. Those are the 5 words. That's it. They're pretty easy, don't you think? And look, the icons already match what you've been learning about, right? So the somebody is the character. That's who that is. You're already collecting that information. And then the character wanted something, right? He wished for it. He wanted it. It was his motivation. But something stood in the way. That was our big flag. But there was a problem. So they did something else. And I'll let you in on a secret here. Sometimes the so is how it gets worse. Sometimes the so is when the guide steps in because the character can't help himself and the guide steps in. Then we have the solution. Then it is resolved. Yeah, that's how you're going to summarize. You're going to use this frame, these transition words, to help you figure out what would be the most important information and turn it into a 2 to 3 sentence summary. Okay, so let me add this to our anchor chart so we don't forget those 5 important words. So how does this work? Let's go and let's look at some passages and let me show you how this is going to work. Okay, so here's a passage by author Liz Shockey again. We see the photograph here. So it looks like some kids at a school, maybe some boys at a school doing some work, right? Okay, so I'll be the reading voice, and then I'll let you in on my thinking as I'm trying to summarize this passage. At the beginning of the school day, a new student named Henry was introduced to the class. He kept his head down and didn't look at any of the other students. A few boys said hi to him, but he still didn't look up. When it came time to do math, Mr. Walters, the teacher, tried to work with him, but several other students needed help too. Mr. Walters kept checking on him, but Henry kept his head down and didn't seem to know how to work the problems. Mr. Walters asked Anwar if he would share his math workbook and help Henry. After a few minutes of working together, Henry calmed down and started to work on the math problems. He was able to help Anwar solve some of the harder problems. Anwar told him how smart he was, and Henry smiled. Okay, so now if we think about our transition words that we're going to use for our summary frame, we've got the somebody in this passage. And what did he want? But something was standing in his way. So what did he try? Or was there a guide to come in? Then how was it solved? So let me go back to our cards here. Somebody, okay? Who is this passage about? So the somebody in this passage, as I look back in, I know that's always right at the very beginning. So here's a little bit about the setting. It's at the beginning of the day, so early in the morning at school. There's a little bit about the setting, okay. But who's the character? Who's the person? A new student. Yeah, Henry. Now, Henry's his name, but that factor that it's a new student, that's pretty important, isn't it? It's not just an every ho-hum day. It's the first day in this class. So I actually have a chart that helps me remember the words in the frame. And so I'm going to use this chart and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write it down because that's what readers do. They write down the details so they can remember them. So a new student, Henry. Okay, that's what I'm going to put down. Henry. A new student, Henry. Well, what did he want? Let's see. That's the next one. What did he want? So let's look back at the passage. Was introduced to the class. A new student named Henry was introduced to the class. He kept his head down and didn't look at any of the other students. A few boys said hi to him, but he still didn't look up. Now, here's the thing. When we do a summary, it doesn't always tell us exactly what the character wanted. Oh, in A Bad Case of Stripes, it did. It told us Camilla wanted to fit in. It actually had the word wanted in the sentence. But this really doesn't. So this is where our thinking voice has to come into play. And so as I look at it, then I'm thinking about, well, Henry's a new student. And so I'm thinking about how that must feel. Scared, alone, even though you're surrounded by people, embarrassed. And it says here that he kept his head down and he didn't look at any of the other boys, any of the other students in the class. And so I'm thinking that really in his heart, what he would want to happen on the new day of school is that he wants to join into his class. He wants to fit in, almost the same as Camilla. I can't believe it. Okay, so a new student, Henry, he wanted, there's the word wanted, so I don't need to write it again. He wanted to fit in at the new school. Okay, so just a phrase, that's all I'm doing. But there's a problem. Well, what is the problem? A few boys said hi to him. That doesn't seem like a problem, but he didn't look up. And so what is the problem here? He wanted to fit in, but he kept his head down. I'm starting to think about that and I'm inferring, and I think he kept his head down because he was embarrassed. I think that's the problem. Because he was embarrassed. Embarrassed. Long word. Okay. So sometimes when you are summarizing and you're determining the most important information, you can find the details and touch them. Just like we did, a new student, Henry. We just touched it. That's all we did. But sometimes you have to infer a little bit. You have to think. You have to tap into that thinking voice and figure out What is the big problem based on what you know that people want or how they feel? Okay, so a new student, Henry, wanted to fit in at the new school, but he kept his head down because he was embarrassed. So, what happened? What happened? So let's keep reading. When it came time to do math, Mr. Walters, the teacher, tried to work with him, but several other students needed help too. Mr. Walters kept checking on him, but Henry kept his head down and didn't seem to know how to do the problems, how to work the problems. Okay, so Mr. Walters asked Anwar if he would share his math workbook and help Henry. After a few minutes of working together, Henry calmed down and he started to work on the math problems. And it says here he was even able to help Anwar do those harder math problems. This so could be where it's difficult, more troubles, the storms of life come in. That could be the so. You know, Mr. Walters didn't have time to help him. Maybe that's the so. So, Mr. Walters tried to help, but he didn't have time. Okay. Then, what's the solution? Well, as I go back in here and I look at the then, I see that it wasn't Mr. Walters who helped. It was actually Anwar. Then Anwar shared his math workbook and helped Henry. And Henry calmed down, right? Okay, so I'm going to think about how I could say that. Then Anwar shared his math workbook and Henry calmed down. Okay, so I'm just writing it down to help me remember. But listen to what a summary actually sounds like. I'm going to use all of these transition words to help me put it together. And it's actually going to become 3 sentences. Listen to this. I don't say the somebody word because that sounds weird. You don't start a sentence with somebody, a new student. No, but I just start right here. A new student, Henry, wanted to fit in at the new school, but he kept his head down because he was embarrassed. Now, period. Really, if I wanted to write this in a paragraph or type it up, I would have a capital letter. I'd have period. That'd be 1 sentence. So, Mr. Walters tried to help, but he didn't have time. Period. I haven't put a period in. Let me just go ahead and stick a period right here because I'm wanting to do that anyway as a writer. Then Anwar shared his math workbook and Henry calmed down. Shared his math workbook and Henry calmed down. So let's hear it again. That was 3 sentences. A new student, Henry, wanted to fit in at the new school, but he kept his head down because he was embarrassed. So Mr. Walters tried to help, but he didn't have time. Then Anwar shared his math workbook and Henry calmed down. I love it. It was 3 sentences. It was a summary. It was the most important information, but I used those 5 words to help me really frame it into 2 to 3 sentences. So I think we should try this out. I think we should try it out with the passage that you guys used the other day, okay? So the passage that we used in the lesson about Brian, Emily, and Stephen. Remember them? Okay, so let's reread it just to remember. Brian, Emily, and Stephen were at Longwater Beach with their dad. All 3 kids were looking forward to their dad playing with them, but when they got there, he didn't. At first, they tried to build sandcastles, but the sand wasn't packing very well. After swimming for a while, they noticed that their dad was still dressed and hadn't changed into his swim trunks. They decided it would be fun to surprise him. They pretended to be building sandcastles, but they sat quietly in the sand with their buckets full of water and waited until he started to walk over to get changed. When he walked past, they jumped up and splashed water on him. Then their dad got his swim trunks on so they could all swim together. Okay, so that is the passage. You remember that one? And then we are going to actually figure out what would be the most important parts to put in our summary. Okay, so we need those 5 words. Remember the 5 words? Somebody, that's the who, the important characters. Wanted, what did they want? What was their motivation? But that was the problem. What stood in the way? So they tried something else. Then what was the solution? Okay, so I'm going to put the passage up and we're focusing in on the somebody. Who would be the most important characters? Who really was having the problem? Go back in and read the first sentence. Yeah, it's right there in the beginning. I agree. Brian, Emily, and Stephen. So that's what we're going to write. Brian, Emily, and Stephen. You got it. Okay. Now, let's look at the next piece. Let's look at what they wanted. What did they want? All 3 kids were looking forward to their dad playing with them, but when they got there, he didn't. Okay, how would you say that though? Yeah, they wanted dad to play with them, or they wanted dad to play at the beach, right? So wanted is already there. Dad to play at the beach. Let's do that, okay? But what was the problem? But he didn't. Yeah, you could do that. You could say, but he didn't. But he didn't because he still had his clothes on or something like that. But he didn't. I think that's enough. We'll just stop there, okay? So Brian, Emily, and Stephen wanted dad to play at the beach, but he didn't. So what did they do instead? You reread. Okay, so there's a lot that they did, right? They tried to build sandcastles, but it wasn't packing very well. Then they noticed that he hadn't put his swim trunks on, okay? They decided it would be fun to surprise him. Okay, so they pretended to be building sandcastles. Oh my gosh, did you hear it? It came out as the so. So they pretended to be building sandcastles. Do you think that's what we should put down? Because they were pretending, right? They were trying to trick him. So they were pretending to build sandcastles. Oops. All right, here's the final one. Here it is. Then what did they do? You read that last part. Yeah, so then what'd they do? They jumped up and dumped their buckets on him, right? They jumped up and splashed water on him. Whew, it's hard sometimes to write when it's down here at the bottom and I'm holding it in the air. All right, so now let's see if that makes sense. Then they jumped up and splashed water on him. You think? Right? Okay, so now let's see if this works. Let's see if it makes sense with our transition words. So we're not going to say the somebody because we don't start sentences like that. Ready? You read it with me. Brian, Emily, and Stephen wanted Dad to play at the beach, but good, he didn't. Okay, so there's our first sentence. So they were pretending to build sandcastles. Then they jumped up and splashed water on him. Guys, you're doing it. You're making the 2 to 3 sentence summary. That's what readers do. They have to find the most important information when they're summarizing. And they've collected a lot of information, all those story elements. But if they use those 5 words, it will really help them get it down to the most important parts. And then they'll have it be 2 to 3 sentences. Okay. So I was fumbling around with my cards. What are the 5 words again? Somebody wanted, like with all his heart, but there was a big problem. That's the flag. So they did something else. Then that's the solution. That's how the problem got solved. So here's your assignment. If you were in Mrs. McCullough's class, here's what you would do. Okay, we're going to go down and I have 2 more passages. One is about an after-school basketball practice. And so Jeremy's working on his layup shots. Okay, so you can read this and then you'll have to go back into the text and look at the text and figure out who's the somebody, what is he wanting, but, and guys, remember, it's not always so obvious. It doesn't say he wanted to do this. Sometimes you got to use that thinking voice and you have to really figure out what the motive is of the character based on what you know about people. Okay. And so you can write those words and phrases. And after you write them, I want you to go back and reread them like we did. That's really important because you have to make sure that it makes sense. And remember, this is really one sentence. This will be your second sentence, and this becomes your third sentence. And that's a good summary. I have another passage here. We've got the boy playing basketball. We've got the girls going out for a walk. Okay, so read about Allison and her 2 sisters and what happened when they tried to go out for a walk. And again, you can do the somebody wanted but so then. So you could print these out. Sure. Miss McCullough, I don't have a printer. No worries. You know what I do? I just take a blank piece of paper and it's all about the words. And so I just write the words out to the side first. I write somebody wanted, but, so, then. It's easy. Just make your own like that because it's the 5 words that are the most important. But here's another thing. Since you're doing this online, maybe if you use Google Docs, maybe you want to go in and you want to actually type it in here into our Google, I think this is slides, and so you can type it in if you want to do that. So that's what you would do if you were in Mrs. McCullough's class. You would read those 2 passages and do the somebody wanted but so then using those frame words to complete 2 of these summaries. That's what I would have you do, but your teacher might have an even better idea.